A brief history of Stoicism. Before it was a philosophy with book, speeches, and masters, Stoicism was born as a shelter, an invisible place where men and women crushed by times of uncertainty could breathe. It was not an intellectual luxury. It was a necessity for survival, like someone who in the middle of a storm finds a firm rock and decides to cling to it, even without knowing how long the sea will roar. Seneca spoke of the ship in the middle of the storm. It's not about controlling the sea, but about holding the rudder with firmness, even when the waves seem to want to tear it from your hand. History shows that, for some, chaos is the end. For others, it is the foundation of something new. Marcus Aurelius governed not only an empire, but also a more difficult territory himself. Amidst wars, diseases, and betrayals, he learned that the hardest battle is the one fought in silence when no one is watching, and that true victory is keeping the soul unshakable even when everything around it fragments. And before them in Athens, there was a place that did not look like a temple or a fortress, but contained a bit of both, the Stoa Poikile, the painted port. There, under columns that held the echo of footsteps and voices, people learned to live with firmness and virtue. It was not a space to recite theories, but to train the mind and character like a blacksmith molds iron, with patience, repetition, and heat. Today we look back and find in these ancient walls something we are still searching for, because the hunger for clarity, dignity, and practical peace is not just a modern whim. It is a human instinct that spans centuries. We still seek a fixed point in the middle of the current. We still need something that teaches us how to be in the world without being swept away by it. And perhaps by following this brief history, we can realize that Stoicism is not just an account of the past. It is a map for those who are still navigating. The history of Stoicism begins, ironically, with a disaster. Zeno of Citium, a Phoenician merchant, lost everything when his ship was shipwrecked. Among the wreckage, there were no goods to rescue, only his own life, and a question that would change the course of philosophy. What is truly worth keeping when the sea takes everything? Walking through Athens without a destination and without fortune, Zeno found the words of Socrates and later the teachings that would lead him to found his own school, not in a palace but in an open space, a porch accessible to everyone. Zeno's shipwreck is more than a biographical episode. It is a living metaphor for the Stoic core. In Stoicism, loss is not synonymous with ruin. On the contrary, it is a starting point. What is lost reveals what was never ours by right, and what remains, reason, virtue, courage, is the true fortress. Seneca would remind us centuries later that difficulties strengthen the mind as labor strengthens the body. The idea of turning tragedy into a foundation is profoundly contrary to the instinctive reaction. Most people cling to what is sinking, like someone trying to hold water with their hand. Zeno, however, learned to let go. This gesture of letting go, which seems like weakness, is in fact the first act of internal mastery. It is the beginning of a life led not by possession, but by discernment. Thus, Stoicism is born from chaos, but it does not feed on it. It is like fire that consumes wood and yet remains pure, adapting to what it receives without losing its essence. What began with a shipwreck would become a lighthouse for those who, even today, need to find direction when all routes seem submerged. The Stoa Poikile was not just an architectural backdrop, but a symbol of silent resistance. Between columns, painted with scenes of battles and victory, men and women learned that the most important war was not fought with spears or swords, but with one's own mind. There, each step echoed as a reminder, living with virtue is more difficult than defeating an external enemy. The porch, open and public, showed that knowledge should not be locked behind marble doors. It was shared, like the fire of a torch that lights another without losing its own brightness. In that space, philosophers and common citizens mixed, debating not to show off erudition, but to refine character. The Stoa was a school, but also a refuge for those who sought a moral compass in times of uncertainty. The presence of the community was vital. Stoicism is not built only in isolation. It is also forged in friction with others, like iron that is tempered in contact with others. The conversations, correction, and even shared silences created an environment where virtue was practiced, not just proclaimed. Each encounter on the porch was an exercise in patience, self-control, and listening. Thus, the Stoa was not just a physical place, but a state of mind, an internal space of firmness and clarity that each practitioner carried with. Even far from the columns of Athens, the true Stoa lived in those who upon leaving, maintained a serene gaze in the face of life's unpredictable tide. When Stoicism crossed the sea and arrived in Rome, it ceased to be merely a philosophical exercise and became a practical life philosophy, shaped by the weight and urgency of the empire. Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius inherited the Greek ideas, but needed to translate them for a scenario where political intrigue, wars, and moral decadence were part of the routine. In Rome, it was not enough to contemplate virtue. It was necessary to apply it in the heat daily decisions. Seneca, an advisor to emperors, wrote letters that were as much warnings as consolation, reminding people that wealth and power did not protect anyone from the brevity of life. Epictetus, born a slave, proved that true freedom did not depend on chains or titles, but on the mastery of one's own thought. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, governed an empire with his hands and himself with his mind, noting in his meditations the reminders that the throne did not make him immune to human fragility. Roman Stoicism was not interested in discussing the nature of the stars while the world was falling apart. It wanted to know how to maintain dignity in the face of slander, how to endure pain without becoming corrupt, how to move forward when hope seemed like a rare coin. It was less about speculation and more about surviving with honor. And it is here that Stoicism reveals its practical heart, living well even when surrounded by adversity, not by waiting for the world to become fairer or the weather to calm down, but by choosing to cultivate an internal space that no tide can invade, a space where serenity is built like a fortress, stone by stone, until no storm can tear it down. At the core of Stoicism, there is a principle as simple as it is demanding: to distinguish what depends on us from what does not. This invisible border is, at the same time, a shield and a sword. He who does not recognize it becomes a slave to external forces, reacting to chance like a boat without a rudder. He who understands it, on the other hand, discovers that freedom is not doing everything you want, but maintaining integrity even when nothing goes as expected. This idea is not an invitation to passivity, but to lucidity. The Stoic does not deny pain, does not pretend that misfortune is irrelevant. He just refuses to give his peace to something he cannot change. Seneca said that true happiness is enjoying the present without anxiously depending on the future. This does not mean indifferent, but the cultivation of a radical attention to the moment one is living. Peace, for Stoicism, is not the absence of problem. It is freedom in the face of them. It is the sailor who, even in headwinds, adjusts the sails and stays on course. It is the mountain that, although surrounded by storms, remains still at its base. It is the flame that dances in the wind but does not go out. This is the heart of the doctrine, the daily choice not to lose oneself in what is beyond our control, while acting with firmness in what is within our reach. A silent but profound discipline that transforms inevitable chaos into a training ground for the soul. Seneca reminded us that life is long enough for those who know how to use it, but too short for those who waste it on distractions, resentment, and useless battle. This warning echoes like an ancient bell, reminding us that time is not an endless river, but a rapid current that does not return. Every day lived without awareness is like water that escapes through your finger. Epictetus, in turn, offers us the key to navigating this current. It is not things that disturb us, but our opinion about. The world can offer us losses, offenses, and challenges, but what truly shapes our experience is the way we choose to interpret each blow. This is the true fortress, an internal citadel, built with attention and discernment. The history of Stoicism does not belong only to men dressed in togas, giving speeches in porches, or writing treatises by the light of oil lamps. It belongs to anyone who, in the middle of a difficult day, takes a deep breath and decides to act with clarity. It lives in those who, even when the world is pressing, keep their dignity intact. And so, we return to the metaphor of the rudder. The sea changes every day, sometimes calm as a mirror, other times fierce as an untamable animal. But for those who have learned to hold firm, every change of wind is just a new route, because in the end, it is not the sea that decides where we go. It is the hand that keeps the course, even when the horizon seems too distant to be reached.